The first complaint came at sunrise. My phone lit up with 14 missed calls from the HOA board. Apparently, every single lake house keycard had stopped working overnight. Families were standing outside their own vacation homes, locked out, and the only person who could fix it was the guy whose $8,500 repair request they had laughed at. Cedar Ridge Shores looks like something straight out of a vacation brochure. The road into the neighborhood curves through a thick corridor of pine trees before opening onto the lake. On calm mornings, the water sits so still it reflects the sky like polished glass. Wooden docks stretch out from nearly every property, and in the early hours you can hear the soft slap of waves against the pilings and the distant hum of fishing boats heading out for the day. Most of the houses here aren't permanent homes. They're lake houses, weekend escapes for people who live 2 or 3 hours away in the city. Doctors, lawyers, tech executives, people who arrive Friday night in shiny SUVs, unload coolers and paddleboards, and spend the weekend pretending they live a simpler life before disappearing again Monday morning. My house is different. It's older, smaller, built long before the development existed. The siding is weathered cedar, and the back porch faces the water exactly the way my father designed it 32 years ago. From that porch, I can see almost the entire shoreline of Cedar Ridge. The expensive new houses, the manicured lawns, the boat lifts slowly rising out of the lake each evening. But what those homeowners don't see is the small concrete utility building sitting about 50 yards behind my garage. Most people assume it's just an old pump shed. In reality, it's the heart of the entire neighborhood. Inside that building is the circulation system that keeps the lake water clean and moving. Without it, the water would stagnate during the hot summer months. Algae would bloom. The shoreline would smell like rotting vegetation within weeks. Next to the pumps are several metal racks filled with equipment that most homeowners here have never thought about. Security servers, network relays, the electronic control system that manages the gate at the neighborhood entrance, and the smart lock system installed on every lake house door. When the developers built Cedar Ridge in the early 90s, they designed everything around that system. And because my father refused to sell that particular slice of land, they had to make an agreement with him. He kept ownership of the maintenance building. They got access to the infrastructure. For decades, the arrangement worked perfectly. The homeowners association covered repair costs. My father handled the maintenance. Pumps got replaced when they wore out. Circuit boards got upgraded every few years. Nobody argued about it because everything kept running smoothly. When my father passed away 6 years ago, the responsibility transferred to me. I'm not a big corporate maintenance company. I'm just the guy who grew up learning how to service pumps and rewire circuit boards beside my dad on Saturday afternoons. But I know every inch of that building, every valve, every cable, every blinking light on the control panels. And most years, the job is quiet. Replace a sensor here. Reset a server there. The neighborhood continues enjoying their peaceful lake weekends without ever realizing how fragile the system underneath them actually is. But infrastructure has a funny way of reminding people it exists. Usually at the worst possible moment. And last winter, during a brutal cold snap, one of the most critical pieces of equipment inside that building finally reached the end of its life. A central control board that manages the lock network and security relays. When it failed, the replacement quote came back at $18,500. Expensive, yes, but necessary. For 30 years, the HOA had always covered those repairs without hesitation. Until the new board president decided things should work differently. And that's when the quiet little maintenance building behind my garage became the center of a neighborhood war. Carolyn Pierce arrived at Cedar Ridge Shores the way some people arrive at a corporate boardroom, confident, polished, and already convinced the place needed her leadership. She moved in early spring, just before the lake season started. Her house was one of the newer builds on the eastern shoreline. A tall, modern lake house with dark metal railings, oversized windows, and a stone fire pit that probably cost more than my entire porch. Within 2 weeks of arriving, she had already introduced herself to half the neighborhood. Not casually either, formally, clipboard in hand. I remember the first time she knocked on my door. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where sunlight pours through the trees and the lake smells clean and cold. When I opened the door, she stood there in a crisp white jacket, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a leather binder like she was about to conduct an audit. "You must be Daniel," she said, smiling the kind of smile that looks friendly but never quite reaches the eyes. "That's me. I'm Carolyn Pierce, new homeowner on Lakeshore Drive. I'm also the newly elected HOA president." She said it like it was a promotion, not a volunteer position. Before I could say anything else, she glanced past me toward the back of the property. "I noticed the utility building behind your garage when I drove in," she said casually. "That's the infrastructure facility, correct?" The way she said infrastructure made it sound like she'd already been researching it. "It's the pump and network building," I replied. "Yeah." She tilted her head slightly, studying the property like a real estate appraiser. "And that belongs to you?" "Always has." Another smile. "Interesting." At the time, I didn't think much of it. New HOA presidents usually spend their first few months learning how things work, asking questions, trying to understand the agreements the community has operated under for years. Carolyn didn't seem interested in understanding. She seemed interested in evaluating. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing stories from other homeowners. Carolyn was holding frequent HOA meetings, long ones, meetings where she asked detailed questions about budgets, maintenance contracts, landscaping costs, and infrastructure spending. A few residents even joked that she ran the meetings like quarterly shareholder reports. But one topic kept coming up again and again: maintenance expenses. More specifically, the equipment inside my building. One afternoon, I was inside the maintenance shed replacing a pressure sensor when the door suddenly opened behind me. No knock. No warning. Carolyn walked inside like she owned the place. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she looked around the room. Pumps hummed steadily in the background while the control racks blinked with tiny green lights. "So, this is it," she said. I set my wrench down slowly. "Private property," I reminded her. "Oh, relax," she said lightly, waving a hand. "I'm just curious." But she wasn't looking around like someone curious. She was inspecting things. Her eyes moved from the pump housings to the electrical panels and finally to the metal server racks that controlled the gate and lock network. "That equipment looks expensive," she said. "It is." "And the HOA pays for repairs?" "According to the agreement, yes." She tapped her binder thoughtfully. "Well," she said after a moment, "we'll have to take a closer look at that." That was the first real red flag. Because most people see a system that keeps the neighborhood running. Carolyn saw something else, a line item, an expense. And from the moment she walked into that building, it became painfully clear that she intended to start cutting costs, even if she didn't fully understand what those costs were protecting, or what would happen if they suddenly disappeared. The moment Carolyn denied the repair request, I knew it wasn't really about the money. It was about control. The board meeting where the vote happened took place in the small clubhouse near the lake entrance. About a dozen homeowners showed up, mostly people who happened to be in town that weekend. The rest joined on a video call. I had brought the diagnostic report with me, printed, highlighted, and simple enough that anyone could understand it. The central control board that managed the electronic lock network and gate system was failing. The internal processor had started throwing error codes. The manufacturer had discontinued the model years ago, and the only option was a full replacement unit. Cost, $8,500. Not cheap, but compared to the value of 47 lake houses, it was barely a drop in the bucket. When it was my turn to speak, I explained everything calmly. The board is still running, I told them, pointing to the report, but it's unstable. It could fail any time. When it does, the system will default to lockdown mode until the hardware is replaced. A few homeowners nodded. One older man even muttered, "Seems straightforward." But Carolyn sat at the head of the table with her arms folded. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You're asking the HOA to spend $18,500 on equipment, located on land that you personally own." "It's infrastructure the entire neighborhood uses," I replied. She gave a thin smile. "That's one interpretation." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. I opened the contract folder in front of me. "It's not an interpretation. It's written in the development agreement." Carolyn didn't even look at the document. Instead, she turned to the rest of the board. "I think we need to ask a bigger question," she said. "Why are we responsible for maintaining equipment that sits on private property in the first place?" The room went quiet. That was the moment I realized she wasn't misunderstanding the agreement. She was challenging it. The vote happened 10 minutes later. 3 board members looked hesitant. 2 followed Carolyn's lead. And just like that, the repair request was denied. The official reason entered into the meeting notes read, "Unnecessary maintenance expenditure." For the next 2 weeks, the system limped along exactly the way I predicted. The first issue was minor. One Friday evening, the main security gate froze halfway open. It took a manual reset from the maintenance console to get it moving again. A few days later, I received 3 calls from homeowners whose keycards suddenly stopped unlocking their front doors. Each time, I had to manually reset the network authentication server. Small glitches. Annoying, but manageable. I emailed the HOA board twice with updated warning reports. Carolyn responded only once. Her message was 1 sentence long. "Temporary inconveniences do not justify an $18,500 expense." That's when I started paying closer attention to the system logs. Every login attempt, every network command, every remote connection gets recorded automatically. Late one night, while reviewing the logs, something unusual caught my eye. 3 failed attempts to access the system's administrative console. The source address wasn't random. It was the computer inside the HOA office. Someone had tried to log into the control network, and they had used the wrong credentials every time. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen while the server fans hummed quietly in the background. They weren't just refusing to approve the repair anymore. They were trying to access the system themselves, which meant 2 things. First, they clearly didn't understand how dangerous it was to tamper with the network. And second, they had absolutely no idea what the original development contract actually allowed me to do if the system failed. After I saw those failed login attempts in the system logs, I stopped treating the situation like a simple maintenance dispute. Now it felt like something bigger. Someone inside the HOA office had tried to access the infrastructure network 3 separate times. Each attempt used slightly different administrator credentials, like they were guessing their way in. That alone was a problem. But what worried me more was the fact that if they had managed to access the system, they could have caused serious damage without even realizing it. The control network didn't just manage door locks. It managed gate motors, authentication servers, and the relay that kept the entire security system synchronized. One bad command could freeze the system or corrupt the firmware. And with the control board already failing, the last thing it needed was amateur experimentation. So I did what my father always did whenever something felt wrong. I went to the cabinet. In the back corner of the maintenance building, behind a stack of spare valves and electrical relays, there's a tall gray filing cabinet that's older than most of the houses in Cedar Ridge. My father kept every original document from the development agreement in there. Contracts, permits, inspection reports, handwritten notes from meetings with the original developer. The drawers slid open with a metallic scrape as I started digging through the folders. It didn't take long to find the document I was looking for. Cedar Ridge Shores Infrastructure Agreement, 1994. The paper had yellowed slightly over the years, but the signatures were still clear. The developer, the county planning office, and my father. I sat down at the workbench and started reading. Most of the contract covered exactly what you'd expect: maintenance obligations, access rights, and payment responsibilities for shared systems. But buried deeper in the document were sections most homeowners had probably never bothered to read. Clauses about operational authority, system ownership, and, most importantly, failure protocols. By the time I reached page 17, I found the paragraph that made everything suddenly make sense. It stated that the infrastructure building, including all control hardware inside it, remained under private ownership of the property holder, which meant me. The HOA wasn't the operator. They were the client. They paid for maintenance and repairs in exchange for continued system access. But one line near the bottom of the page stood out more than anything else. In the event of infrastructure malfunction or safety risk, the system owner reserves the right to suspend access until necessary repairs are authorized and funded. I read it again slowly. Suspend access. That meant the lock network, the gate. Everything tied into the system. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the pumps and the faint ticking of cooling metal in the control racks. Then I did the smart thing. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a property attorney who specialized in development agreements and infrastructure easements. I emailed him the entire contract and waited. He called back the next afternoon. "Daniel," he said, sounding almost amused, "this agreement is incredibly clear." "Clear how? You own the system. The HOA only has usage rights. If the hardware fails and they refuse to fund repairs, you are legally allowed to suspend service until the issue is resolved." I leaned back in my chair. "Even the electronic locks?" "Especially the locks," he replied. "They're part of the infrastructure." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added one more thing. "Just make sure you follow the protocol exactly. Document the failure, notify the board, and allow the system to enter its default state." Default state. I already knew what that meant. If the failing control board finally died, the security system would automatically trigger a protective lockdown to prevent unauthorized access. No keycards. No remote entry. Nothing. 47 lake houses suddenly sealed shut. And according to the diagnostics report glowing on my computer screen, the control board's processor temperature had started climbing again, which meant the system wasn't just unstable anymore. It was counting down to failure. 3 days after I spoke with the lawyer, Carolyn showed up at my house. I heard her car before I saw it, tires crunching slowly over the gravel driveway. Through the front window, I watched a sleek black SUV roll to a stop near the garage. The driver's door opened, and Carolyn stepped out like she was walking into a meeting she intended to win. Same crisp posture. Same confident stride. And of course, the clipboard. I stepped outside before she reached the porch. The late afternoon sun hung low over the lake, casting long shadows across the yard. A cool breeze rustled through the pine trees, carrying the faint smell of the water. Carolyn stopped a few feet away and held up a sheet of paper. "I received another one of your maintenance alerts," she said. Her voice had that familiar polished tone, half polite, half irritated. "The system diagnostics are escalating," I replied. "The control board is getting worse." She glanced down at the paper like it was an inconvenience. "This report says the processor is overheating." "It is." "And your solution," she continued, "is still the same $18,000 replacement?" "Yes," Carolyn exhaled slowly, the kind of dramatic sigh people make when they think they're dealing with someone unreasonable. "You're exaggerating the urgency," she said. "We've had minor glitches before." I leaned against the porch railing. "This isn't a glitch." She crossed her arms. "Then explain something to me." Her eyes shifted past me toward the small concrete building behind the garage, the maintenance shed that quietly powered the entire neighborhood. "That equipment sits on your land," she said. "You control it. You service it." "Yes. So why," she continued carefully, "should the HOA pay nearly $20,000 to repair machinery on property we don't own?" For a moment, I just studied her. The confidence in her expression was almost impressive, because she genuinely believed she had found some kind of loophole. "You signed the maintenance agreement when you bought the house," I said. She gave a small shrug. "Contracts get renegotiated all the time." "Not this one." Carolyn's smile tightened slightly. "You're being dramatic." I pushed away from the railing. "Do you want to see the system logs?" She didn't move. "The diagnostics, the overheating warnings, the error codes, it's all in the building. You're welcome to take a look." But Carolyn stayed exactly where she was. Instead, she flipped a page on her clipboard. "I've spoken with the board," she said. "We're confident the system will continue functioning long enough for us to evaluate alternatives." "Alternatives?" "Yes." "Like what?" "Moving the infrastructure," she said simply. I almost laughed. "You can't relocate the system without rebuilding half the network." "We'll cross that bridge when we get there." The wind shifted across the lake, rattling the pine branches above us. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Carolyn delivered the sentence that made everything suddenly very clear. "If the system stops working," she said, "that's your responsibility. It's on your land." The statement hung in the air between us. I studied her face carefully, searching for any hint that she understood what she had just said. But she looked completely certain, completely confident, which meant she had absolutely no idea what the contract actually said. I stepped down off the porch and walked a few feet closer, lowering my voice slightly. "No," I said quietly. Her eyebrows lifted. "No?" I nodded once. "If the system stops working, it becomes a community infrastructure failure." Carolyn frowned. "And?" "And according to the agreement," I continued, "that means access gets suspended until repairs are funded." For the first time since she arrived, her confidence flickered. Just slightly. "You wouldn't actually disrupt the entire neighborhood over this," she said. The lake breeze moved through the trees again, carrying the distant creak of dock ropes against wooden posts. I looked past her toward the maintenance building, the place my father had spent decades keeping that system alive. Then I looked back at her. "You're welcome to approve the repair any time," I said. Carolyn stared at me for another long second. Then she turned sharply, walked back to her SUV, and drove away without another word. As the sound of her engine faded down the road, I glanced at my phone. A new diagnostic alert had just appeared. The processor temperature on the control board had climbed another 3 degrees, which meant the system was getting closer to failure. And when it finally happened, there wouldn't be anything left for Carolyn to argue about. The control board failed exactly the way the diagnostics predicted. It happened at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because my phone woke me up with the alert. For a moment I just stared at the screen in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sound of water moving against the shoreline. System failure. Primary control board offline. There it was, 30 years of service, and the board had finally given up. I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out toward the maintenance building behind the garage. The night air was cold and still, the lake reflecting a pale strip of moonlight between the trees. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt different immediately. The constant hum of the server rack had changed pitch. Two of the control lights that normally blinked green were now dark. The system monitor displayed a simple message across the screen. Network failsafe mode activated. That was the default protocol the manufacturer designed decades ago. When the board lost communication with the authentication system, it locked the network down to prevent unauthorized access. Gate access disabled. Remote authentication disabled. Electronic lock network frozen. Exactly as designed. I documented everything. Photos of the error codes, screenshots of the diagnostics, timestamps for the shutdown. My lawyer had been very clear about that part. Then I went back to bed. The chaos started around sunrise. At 6:47 a.m., my phone began vibrating on the nightstand. The first call came from a property manager who handled 3 of the lake houses. "Daniel, something's wrong with the lock system," he said quickly. "None of the key cards are working." I told him the infrastructure had failed, and the system was in lockdown. The second call came 3 minutes later. Then another, and another. By 7:05, my phone had logged 14 missed calls and a growing stream of text messages. Families arriving for weekend stays couldn't open their doors. Rental guests were standing on porches, trying the same key card over and over. One homeowner reported the gate refusing to open for his car. And right on schedule at 7:10 a.m., my phone rang again. "Carolyn." I answered on the second ring. "What did you do?" she demanded immediately. Her voice was sharp, panicked in a way I had never heard before. "I followed the contract," I said calmly. "Every house is locked," she snapped. "The entire neighborhood can't get inside." "The control board failed," I explained. "The system automatically entered failsafe mode." "Well, fix it." "I will." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted about 3 seconds. Then Carolyn asked the question she had avoided for weeks. "What does it take to restore access?" "The replacement control board?" I said. "You mean the $18,000 repair?" $18,500. Another pause. Behind her voice, I could hear other people talking. Angry homeowners gathering somewhere nearby. "You need to restore access immediately," she said. "I can't," I replied. "Why not?" "Because the system physically won't come back online without the new board." That wasn't entirely dramatic either. The hardware literally wouldn't boot the network anymore. "So what happens now?" she asked. "That depends on the HOA," I said. "How?" "As soon as the repair is approved and funded, I'll install the replacement and bring the network back online." For several seconds, the line stayed completely silent. Then Carolyn hung up. By noon, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Apparently, homeowners were furious after learning the entire lock network depended on a piece of equipment the board had refused to replace. The vote happened quickly this time. Not only did they approve the $18,500 repair, they also approved a 3-year infrastructure maintenance contract to prevent something like this from ever happening again. I installed the new board 2 days later. The system booted cleanly. Key cards started working again. The gate opened like nothing had ever happened. But the real twist came 2 weeks afterward. Carolyn Pierce resigned as HOA president. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about why 47 lake houses had suddenly been locked down overnight. And it turns out, homeowners who spend $500,000 on vacation properties really don't appreciate being stranded on their own front porches, especially when the entire crisis could have been avoided. With one signature. So now I want to hear your opinion. If you were in my position, and the HOA refused to approve a critical repair that kept the entire neighborhood running, what would you have done? Would you have kept fixing the system out of your own pocket? Or let the failure prove your point? And what do you think about Carolyn's decision to deny the repair in the first place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if you enjoy dramatic HOA stories like this, don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to Stories of HOA for more unbelievable neighborhood battles.